tell Jack about the dowry.
Welcome to the Progress Texas Happy Hour.
If you don't have a wedding, we can just get married.
Welcome back to the Progress Texas Happy Hour. I'm podcasting director Chris Mosher.
I'm digital associate Haley Smith.
And I'm digital director Sam Gonzalez.
Today's conversation is part of our ongoing series with Democratic lawmakers in Texas in advance of the 2025 legislative session. What's ahead and what's at stake for our state as the second Trump administration begins. We're proud to welcome back Representative James Talarico. He's a native of Williamson County, represents District 50, including Northeast Austin and Southern Pflugerville since 2022, after having first been elected in 2018 to the House seat representing District 52 prior to redistricting that made that district more favorable for Republicans. They tried and failed to draw James Talarico out of the picture, and we're so glad that they actually failed in that. Rep. Talarico is a UT and Harvard graduate, currently seeking a Master of Divinity at Austin Presbyterian Theological Seminary. He's been a terrific resource for people who wish to understand progressive thinking through the lens of Christian theology, which for me has been very valuable and interesting. He's one of our faves for a long time. We're super proud to have him back. Representative James Talarico, great to see you again.
Yeah, thank y'all for having me. I love this show and I'm honored to be here.
All right, let's start with how you're viewing the election that we've just gone through. We're here to talk about what's coming up, but please share your thoughts on what went wrong for Democrats and what progressive side needs to adjust for the next go around.
Well, you know, in my election, I was elected to a fourth term in the Texas House, and that is a tremendous honor that doesn't get old. You know, the fact that my neighbors and former teachers and former classmates all put their trust in me to be their voice at the Texas Capitol is a truly humbling thing to wrap your head around. And so I want to thank my constituents and my supporters for giving me the chance to serve again in a fourth term. But election night was not easy for me, like it wasn't easy for most Democrats across Texas and across the country. I think this underscores the need to grow our coalition. There's a tendency among Democratic activists to focus on mobilization over persuasion, because mobilization makes us feel better, right? The idea that everyone already agrees with us, everyone's already on our side, we just got to get them to show up to vote. You know, we've heard this refrain of Texas is not a red state, it's a non-voting state. And again, that makes us feel good. But I think what we learned in this election is that we have a lot of work to do to bring people over to our side, to make the argument and win the debate. There really is no way around persuasion in a democracy. You've got to change hearts and minds. I know that's harder. I know it takes more work, but we've got to reach people and win people over to our side if we hope to build a big enough majority to make change in this state and in this country.
Regarding that, to the fight ahead, Republicans are more emboldened than ever with the Trump win. What do you expect in terms of the Democratic Party's situation in the 2025 session overall? And more specifically, what challenges do you see and how do we take them head on?
Well, you know, I'm going to contradict myself a little bit from my first answer, which is that we shouldn't overlearn or underlearn lessons from this election. Politics is a lot like physics. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. My political awakening was when I was in middle school during the Iraq War. I joined protests as an eighth grader here in Central Texas against that invasion. You know, we saw that President Bush took us to war illegally and under false pretenses. And on election night in 2004, I was sure that the country would reject those lies and that failed leadership. But in fact, George W. Bush won the popular vote on election night in 2004 after he had lost the popular vote in 2000. And so I remember how crushing that election night was for me and a lot of progressives across the country. And I remember the hot takes in the aftermath of that 2004 election, that Democrats were going to be in the wilderness for a generation, that if we were going to win, we had to elect pro-war candidates to office. None of that turned out to be true. 2 years after that election night, Democrats swept here in Texas and across the country in the 2006 midterms. And then 4 years after that election night, we elected Barack Hussein Obama, who was known for his anti-war position. So I think it's important for us to take all these hot takes with a grain of salt and remember that it takes a while for the dust to settle and to truly learn the actual lessons from an election cycle. And then to your question about hope, sometimes it seems really dark, but that's when you can see the stars. And I think there are lots of reasons to feel hopeful moving into this legislative session and into the midterm elections of 2026.
Another one of those truisms that I think is kind of one of those, if there are laws of physics that apply to politics, one of those things that I have been told multiple times is when you see a big win like this, when you see one party take over the executive and also the legislative branch at the federal level, that overreach is almost guaranteed, and that overreach is bad for the incumbent party in the next cycle. So, at this point, we're kind of hoping that the damage from that overreach is not too terribly bad before we have another try at it in 2026. Pivoting Rep. Talarico to reproductive rights in the state session and the Texas session for 2025. Those same Republicans, like I say, are very likely to overreach in that department as well and expand their assault on Texas women by further limiting access to abortion, targeting access to life-saving abortion drugs that are used in miscarriage care in hospitals. They're talking about limits on contraception. They're talking about doing away with no-fault divorce to kind of expand from reproductive rights to women's rights in general. So where do you see at this point that fight headed in 2025?
Well, I think this is yet another example of Republican extremism here in the Texas Capitol. And the good news is that the people of Texas are with us on these issues. The vast majority of Texans believe that women in this state should have access to safe and legal abortions. In fact, I spent some time up in Amarillo this election cycle campaigning with local activists who were trying to stop a travel ban that extremists were attempting to put in place in Amarillo. And we were successful in that effort. Even in the deep red panhandle, voters stood up for reproductive rights. And so this is something that we have broad support among the electorate on. And I think we've got to use that to organize outside the Capitol so that we can pressure lawmakers in the Capitol. We've got public opinion on our side, and it's time for all of us, regardless of your party, regardless of your faith, to stand up to this extremism we're seeing in the Republican Party.
We're looking at, and we'll talk more about this as the conversation goes on, different ways, opportunities at common ground. And that Amarillo case is really interesting. And I didn't know that you had been up there involved in that. So that's really interesting. The way we've heard that, I wouldn't say spun, but the way it's been talked about, kind of in our circles has been that those voters landed on the negative side of the travel ban question due to the constitutionality of it all, that it was that it had less to do with reproductive freedom or abortion rights than it did with just not wanting to do something that would violate the U.S. Constitution. Would you agree with that, being someone who was there at the time?
Well, I certainly think there is still bipartisan commitment to the Constitution, and that is critically important as we enter this second Trump term. But I remember when I was up there, the local activists were actually using biblical slogans to be able to win over voters. I distinctly remember a sign that said, "Love thy neighbor, vote against Prop A." So this was deeper than kind of constitutional law or some kind of abstract legal argument. This was about a commitment to our neighbors who are in need, our neighbors who are in a tough situation and need our help. Especially folks up in the Panhandle. They believe in live and let live, respecting the autonomy and the independence of other people is a critical value here in Texas. We're a freedom-loving people in this state. And when Republican extremism tries to take away our fundamental freedoms, it's an affront to our values as Texans. And so we got to remember that as we go into this session and the next election cycle.
What's interesting is that Texans will, in one breath, say, hey, maybe we shouldn't restrict travel, and then talk about immigration. They're like, hey, maybe we should restrict travel with nonsense border walls, et cetera, et cetera. Switching to immigration, How do you expect Donald Trump's deportation operation to play out in Texas? And what advice might you have for Texas families of mixed immigration status? We know that Operation Lone Star has been the playbook for Greg Abbott, and a lot of those things are going to be put into play on a national scale. What can progressives in Texas and elsewhere do to help and support people who may be targeted in this instance?
Well, I think voters here in Texas and across the country in this last election made it clear that they want to see comprehensive immigration reform.
Right.
They're against chaos. We should all be against chaos on our southern border. It's not good for American citizens. It's not good for border communities, and it's not good for migrants. The Democratic Party should be the anti-chaos party. And so we've got to fix the situation on our southern border. We've got to fix our immigration system. But what's also important to remember is that we are a country of immigrants. All of us have an immigrant story. You wouldn't be having someone with the last name Talarico on your podcast if we weren't a nation of immigrants. So both those things can be true at the same time. What I'm worried about is that Donald Trump is not going to reform our immigration system. He's not going to pursue common sense solutions to the problems at our border. Instead, he's going to deport hardworking Americans who have been here for decades, pillars of our community, small business owners, grandmothers and aunts and uncles, and people who contribute to this economy. And so that kind of overreach is not just going to have a devastating impact on our Texas economy. It's going to have a devastating impact on the families that we care about. Y'all know that I was a public school teacher before I got into politics. I was a teacher on the west side of San Antonio, and I taught a lot of undocumented students. And I don't mean to be pushing a stereotype, but those undocumented students, they tended to be the hardest working students that I had. They tended to be the most patriotic students that I had. There's something about being an immigrant, especially a recent immigrant, that that makes you believe in this country in a way that us native borns sometimes forget or take for granted. So these students that I taught are a treasure to our state. They are now, a lot of them are in college. Some of them have graduated college and are now productive, contributing members of our society. We've got to stand with those young people. We've got to stand with our undocumented neighbors. And then we've got to push the Trump administration to do what we want, which is actual reform to our immigration system.
Right. We've been known as the land of opportunity for the longest time. And I think a lot of people forget that. The other part of that, I heard earlier this week, how could immigrants overwhelm the workforce when they've already been a part of the workforce, when they're already a huge factor, whether it be in farm working, manufacturing, et cetera? How can they really ruin the economy when they've been part of the economy for as long as any one of us have been around?
And our economy relies on immigrants.
Right.
You mentioned immigration is a key part of our national character, our national identity, but it is a key part of our economy. Unless all of us on this podcast want to start picking our own fruit, packing our own meat, or building the highways out in this heat, then we got to start showing some respect to the hardworking immigrants who have helped us build this economy. Of course, if anyone is a threat to public safety, if anyone is committing violent crimes, then they should be dealt with. Same with native-born Americans. But if you are an immigrant who has come here and is contributing to this economy without taking many benefits, we all know that undocumented folks contribute far more than they take in any kind of government benefits because they're not eligible for most of those benefits. We've got to recognize that fact if we're going to approach this issue with the thoughtfulness that it deserves.
As a son of somebody who picked apples and grapes and cotton, no, thank you. I would rather not be out there. It's hard work. And I welcome anybody who's listening. Go try it out if you think it's easy.
My dad is a home builder up in the Lubbock area, and I spent a little bit of time working on his framing crews when I was in my early 20s. And I tell you now, in my mid 50s, I can't do that work anymore. That's hard work. So yes, absolutely. We do stand to lose a lot of our, literal manpower in this situation if they go as far as they say they're going to go with it. Rep. Talarico, let's pivot to healthcare here. Lately, I'm sure you've noticed there's been a strong groundswell of negative public opinion about the for-profit health insurance industry. This has been a story that's really kind of taken a life of its own lately. Texas, a few facts here. We're already dead last in healthcare coverage overall. We have long neglected lower income folks in Texas by refusing to accept expanded federal funding here. Under Donald Trump and the billionaires who are now guiding his plan, even that lifeline appears to be threatened. So, Rep. Talarico, what do you see coming in the new year for healthcare in Texas?
Yeah, we have a broken healthcare system in this country, and we as progressives have been and should continue to be the ones pushing for dramatic change to that system. Y'all know that I'm a type 1 diabetic. I was diagnosed when I was 28 years old. In my first campaign for this office, I was doing a walk across my district, and halfway through, I started to feel fatigued and nauseous. I finished that walk. I went home and I slept for 36 hours straight. And my parents got worried about me and they took me to the ER. The nurses checked my blood sugar. I don't think I'd ever had my blood sugar tested before. They told me normal blood sugar is below 100. Mine was 900. I was in a state of diabetic ketoacidosis, which lead to coma and death without insulin. I was lucky to be alive. And when I left the ICU, I went to Walgreens to pick up my first 30-day supply of insulin, this new medicine that I now needed to live. And I wasn't worried about affording it. I had health insurance. And when I went to check out at Walgreens, that 30-day supply of insulin cost me $684. I did not have that kind of money. I still don't have that kind of money. So I put it on a credit card. And that's exactly what most diabetics, it's what most Americans who need healthcare are facing every single day. And so when I got elected, I worked with my Republican colleagues across the aisle, and we passed the first ever insulin copay cap in the state of Texas, $25 per prescription. The next session, we built on that progress. I worked with the Freedom Caucus, of all people, to pass a bill that will import cheaper prescription drugs from Canada into Texas. That bill passed, both chambers got signed by the governor. We're working on an application to the FDA to start importing those cheaper drugs into Texas in the years to come. Next session, I'm going to be working on ways to reduce medical debt, which is crushing working people across our state. I'm also going to be continuing my work on prescription drugs, trying to allow Texas to bulk purchase prescription drugs that can save people on this cost. So this is an area we've got to do a lot more work on. Healthcare is a human right, and our system is deeply dysfunctional, deeply broken, and deeply immoral. We cannot be satisfied with the status quo, and we've got to fight for big, dramatic change.
Absolutely. And especially with healthcare, the working class is feeling so much of that hurt and that struggle right now. Congressman Greg Casar has talked lately about the importance of cutting past the culture war distractions that Republicans like to throw at us and focusing on the fact that we're actually engaged in more of like a class war, with Donald Trump packing his cabinet with wealthy supporters and becoming best friends with 400 billionaire Elon Musk. The sides are pretty well defined. How should everyday working Texans of either party be viewing matters of economy and opportunity?
Yeah, it's a great question. I've come to believe through my work as a public school teacher and now as a legislator that politics is not really left versus right, it's top versus bottom. So many of the divisions in this country are manufactured by the billionaires that you just mentioned, Elon Musk being at the top of the list. His algorithms on places like Twitter intentionally divide us and distract us on these culture war issues. They're dividing us by race, by culture, by religion, by gender, to keep us from realizing how much we have in common. Because once we do, we're going to come together across race, across culture, across religion, across gender to take power back from the billionaires like Elon Musk and Rupert Murdoch and start to take power for our communities. And that's what they're really afraid of. Our unity has always been a threat to their power. And so that's why I've encouraged folks in the aftermath of this election not to give up on our neighbors, not to write off people in our families or across the street. We're going to need that unity if we are going to to take power back from the Elon Musks and the Donald Trumps of the world.
In the sake of unity, are there any legislative priorities that haven't been spoken about today? Whether that would be having others join you in stopping a bad bill or even promoting a good one, whether it be on voting rights, climate justice, education, gun safety. Is there anything that you think can get passed or can be stopped with bipartisan support?
Yeah, so on the defensive side of the ball, I have my eye on private school voucher scams. This is any attempt to take our hard-earned tax dollars out of our underfunded public schools and giving those tax dollars to unaccountable private schools. This has been the governor's top priority as he and his billionaire megadonors attempt to dismantle public schools in the state of Texas. A bipartisan majority last year stood up to the governor and his mega donors and defeated his voucher scam on the floor of the House. I led that effort on the Democratic side of the aisle, and I'll be leading that effort going into this legislative session as well. On the offensive side of the ball, I think we have a real opportunity to make progress on early childhood education. As an educator, I don't believe in silver bullets when it comes to education policy, but the closest thing we have to a silver bullet is high quality, affordable, and accessible early childhood education and care. I've passed bills over the last 2 sessions to improve the quality of early childhood education and make it more affordable. So last session, we passed a bill that got voted on by the people of Texas in the constitutional election to give property tax breaks, property tax exemptions to child care providers in our communities. And that bill is already making a huge difference in small towns and big cities across Texas. We've got to double down on that this session. We've got to put some real money behind our early childhood system to make sure that we're giving kids of all backgrounds, regardless of how much money your parents make, regardless of what zip code you were born into, a real shot at a good life. And I promise every dollar we spend in those first 1,000 days of a child's life, those first 3 years, is going to be a dollar we save in higher educational attainment, a lower need for remediation, lower criminal justice costs, lower public assistance. So this is a good investment. It's the best investment we can make. And I hope the Democrats and Republicans will come together, recognize that, and bet on our youngest Texans.
And that's what I love about progressive policies like that. It benefits everybody. It benefits everyone. It makes life easier for everyone. And I think people forget that politics can be that way. And a lot of times progressive politics are that way. Doesn't matter if you're left or right, up or down, it's going to help you. We're trying to help. And I think that's my biggest takeaway from looking at the comparisons of what the incoming Republicans are trying to do and what progressives that are in power and that are coming in are trying to do as well, is that we're trying to help pretty much across the board as best we can.
And this is not a red issue or a blue issue. It's a green issue. This is going to make us money.
No. And people like that. The
next great business idea, the next great innovation, the next cure for a disease is locked in the brain of a child on the west side of San Antonio, or in the 3rd Ward of Houston, or in the Rio Grande Valley, or in a small town in rural Texas. And our job is to create an environment where that child can fulfill their God-given potential. And once we do that, our economy is going to take off, and we're going to see innovations like we've never seen before. We've just got to invest in our tiniest Texans if that vision is going to become a reality.
I love that positive message. Rep. Talarico, as we begin to close here, progressives in Texas, I think like us who are, engaged in the fight and really paying close attention, I think a lot of us have kind of started to get over the shock of the election and started to kind of think about the realities that lie ahead and what kind of strategies we can derive. But there are still lots of people out there who perhaps are not as dialed in, who are still in a bit of a state of fear or apprehension about what's coming in 2025. Can you offer some words of encouragement for those folks as we move forward in the new year?
This is the literal darkest time of the year, right? The sun is setting a lot earlier in the day. The days are shorter, but in that darkness, we still find light, finding that hope in the darkness. That's what will sustain us in the weeks and months and years ahead. We're going to need that stubborn hope, the kind of hope that our forebears, whether it was farm workers or civil rights organizers or labor organizers, they faced worse setbacks, and they still persevered to give us the country we have today. That we should take inspiration from those organizers of the past and hold on to that hope even when things are dark.
The audacity of hope, as someone said. Representative James Talarico of the Austin area, we appreciate you coming on and hanging out. It's always inspiring to talk to you, and best of luck in the session, and let us know what's happening.
Thank y'all for the work you do.
Absolutely. Here at Progress Texas, speaking of which, we're in the business of countering the conservative disinformation machine that's largely responsible for the mess we're in lately. That machine is funded by oil billionaires and tech billionaires and religious right-wing groups and more. We rely mostly on everyday Texans just like you who value our work and share our belief that a Texas that works for everybody is the Texas that we want to live in. We don't do subscriptions and we don't do paywalls because we believe the message of progress is one that everyone should be able to access, learn from, and act upon, importantly. So if you become a regular listener, we could use your support. No amount is too small. Go to progresstexas.org/donate. Richard Rodine, Marvin Hecker, and Hannah Banks have all done that lately. We appreciate all y'all so much. We also want to extend some more thanks to our folks who have pitched in for our holiday fundraising parties this year for 2024. That includes the Mid-Cities Democrats, the West Austin Democrats, John Mazzaro, Holly Taylor, and John Adair, and Carol Orr. We thank all of you for your valued and ongoing support. Again, progresstexas.org/donate. Thanks so much for listening. Thanks for all you do to press progress forward here in the Lone Star State. Thanks to Sam. Thanks to Haley. And we will catch you again next time.